The breakfast that changed everything. Asterisk Jace walked into the old space. Motel with dust on his boots and a tired look in his eyes. He had been flying cargo ships for the past 5 days without proper rest or food. The planet was quiet, the sky dim, and the buildings looked like they had seen better years. He just wanted a hot meal and a bed that didn't shake when he lay down. He handed over his ID to the front desk and got a key card to room 27 inside. The room was small but clean. There was a metal bed, a desk with one broken leg, and a touchscreen menu on the wall. Jace dropped his bag, stretched his arms, and walked over to the screen. He scrolled through the food options and selected standard human breakfast. The menu asked include companion service, but Jace ignored it and just tapped order. He didn't know what companion service meant, and he didn't care. He sat on the bed, leaned back, and closed his eyes. After a few minutes, a chime rang and someone knocked at the door. He opened it slowly, expecting a robot or delivery drone. Instead, a tall alien girl stood there, holding a tray of food in both hands. She had smooth lavender skin, long silver hair, and bright teal eyes that blinked slowly. She wore a long white robe with golden thread, and her face was calm, almost too calm. Jace looked past her, expecting someone else, but there was no one in the hallway. She stepped inside silently, placed the tray on the desk, and then turned toward him without saying a word. She walked to the corner of the room and knelt down quietly. Jace stared at her, confused and uncomfortable. He asked, who are you? But she didn't answer. He stepped closer and said, Kay, I didn't order you, I just wanted food. She finally looked up and spoke in a soft, careful voice. I was assigned to you for breakfast, Master, she said slowly. Jace froze in place. Unsure if he heard her right, he walked back toward the desk and pressed the help button on the wall. The motel clerk appeared on the screen, chewing gum and looking bored. What's the issue, sir? The clerk asked. Jace replied, why? Is there a girl in my room saying she was assigned to me? The clerk raised an eyebrow and said, you ordered breakfast with companion service, right? Jace said, I didn't mean that. I didn't know what it meant. The clerk sighed and said, it's the local custom here, sir. Some guests like a friendly assistant with their meal. Jace pointed at the screen, frustrated. She's not food, she's a person. The clerk nodded. Of course she's a person, but she's part of the hospitality program, trained to serve. Jace turned to look at the girl, who hadn't moved from her kneeling position. Her hands were still folded on her lap. Her eyes focused on the floor. He said to the clerk, I want to send her back. This isn't right. The clerk's voice turned serious. Returning her means rejecting her, and they don't take well to that here. Jace frowned. What does that mean, they don't take it well? The clerk paused, then said, she'll be recycled, sir. Reassigned or worse. Jace's stomach twisted, and he looked back at the girl. She must have heard everything because her shoulders were trembling slightly. He walked over and gently touched her shoulder. You don't have to kneel, okay? She looked up, her eyes wide with confusion. You are not angry? Jace shook his head slowly. No, I'm not angry. She rose to her feet, standing tall, much taller than Jace had expected. Up close she looked even more beautiful, but there was sadness in her expression. He asked, what's your name? She replied quietly. My name is Lissa, but I'm called Unit 17 by the staff. Jace felt like the air had gone cold in the room. He motioned toward the chair by the desk. You can sit down if you want. She hesitated, then slowly walked to the chair and sat down carefully. Jace looked at the tray she had brought. Eggs, bread, and some juice. He offered her a piece of toast, but she shook her head. I'm not allowed to eat until my service is complete. Jace picked up the tray and placed it between them. You're eating with me. That's part of your service now, he said firmly. Lissa stared at him, then slowly reached out and picked up the toast. She took a small bite, and her eyes lit up with surprise and joy. It was the first time she had ever eaten beside a guest, instead of on the floor. In that small motel room, something had changed between them. Jace no longer saw her as a stranger or a mistake in the system. He saw a girl who didn't belong in chains or programs. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew he couldn't just walk away from her now, not after seeing her eyes light up from a piece of toast. The motel's secret program. Jace couldn't sleep after breakfast. The room felt too quiet, and the silence made him think too much. Lissa had curled up on the floor, the door, refusing the bed no matter how many times he asked her to use it. He finally gave up and sat on the edge of the bed, watching her pretend to sleep. He didn't understand how this place could offer people like her with a meal. The next morning, Jace went to the front desk in person. The lobby smelled like cheap air, freshener, and old circuits. The same clerk from the screen was behind the desk, tapping lazily on a Holly tablet. Jace slapped the counter, and the clerk looked up with a sigh. I want real answers, Jace said. What kind of place gives you a girl with eggs and toast? The clerk gave a shrug and said, it's part of the companion service, optional with every guest package. Jace leaned forward. She's not food. She's not a robot. She's a living person. What is this? The clerk gave him a tired look. She was bred and trained here. Like all the others, we get shipments of bioengineered companions from the Axion breeding ships every cycle. He added casually, they're programmed for loyalty, beauty, and silence makes guests feel powerful. Jace felt sick hearing those words. He slammed his palm on the desk again. And if I say I don't want her? The clerk's smile faded. Then she's rejected and reprocessed or disposed of. If there's no next assignment, believe me, most of them would rather stay with you, he added. Jace looked around the lobby, suddenly noticing other guests with quiet alien girls walking behind them like shadows. He turned and walked out, his hands shaking with anger. Back in the room, Lissa had cleaned everything and folded the blanket perfectly. She stood up when he entered, her eyes searching his face for signs of rejection. Jace sat down and pointed at the bed. Sit down. Lissa, please, not on the floor. She obeyed, sitting stiffly on the edge like she didn't know how to relax. I talked to the front desk, Jace said. Lissa nodded but didn't look at him. They told me what happens if I send you back, he added quietly. She nodded again, her voice small. Then I will disappear, like Unit 9 did last cycle. Jace's jaw tightened. What if I don't want that to happen? Lissa blinked slowly. Then I belong to you, Master. No, not like that, Jace said. Not as something that belongs, I mean. What if you stayed here because you wanted to? Lissa tilted her head slightly as if the idea didn't make sense to her. I was made to serve, not to choose, she said softly. Jace leaned forward. But what if I want you to choose? What if I help you learn how to be free? She stared at him with confusion. Why would you do that? Jace answered, because you're not a thing, Lissa. You're a person who deserves a life of her own. She lowered her eyes, her voice shaking. If you treat me like that, you will punish me when I return. You're not going back, Jace said firmly. Not if I can help it. Lissa looked up again, and this time her eyes were not afraid, they were curious. The next day, Jace started showing her little things. He let her pick what music to play on the room speaker system. She chose a soft alien melody he had never heard, and she hummed quietly with it. He asked if she had a favorite color, and she said, I don't know, I never chose anything. Jace gave her his old shirt and let her pick clothes from the station market's digital catalog. When she chose a bright green jacket and smiled shyly at herself in the mirror, Jace knew something had changed. Later, he showed her how to make toast using the old food unit in the room. She giggled when the toast popped up and caught it in the air with her hands. It was the first real laugh he heard from her, and it made the room feel brighter. For the first time, Lissa wasn't just serving, she was living. That night, Lissa asked a question. If I'm not a servant, then what am I to you? Jace looked at her, unsure what to say. He replied slowly, you're someone I care about and someone I want to help. She touched her chest gently. No one ever said that to me before. Later, as Jace turned off the lights, he saw her sleeping on the bed for the first time. She held the bright green jacket close to her body like a blanket. He stared at the ceiling and whispered to himself, I can't leave her here. Not in this place. Jace didn't know how, but one thing was certain in his mind. He was going to get Lissa out of Tevin if it meant breaking every rule in the system. Teaching her freedom. The next morning, Jace handed Lissa a brush and pointed to the mirror. She tilted her head. Unsure what to do with it, he said, it's for your hair, try brushing it the way you like. Lissa held the brush like a tool she had never seen before. Her fingers moved slowly, and she smiled when her silver hair flowed smoothly through the bristles. That small moment felt big to Jace. He saw her eyes light up just from brushing her own hair. She had spent her life waiting for orders. Now she was learning to make her own choices. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He decided to show her more. One small freedom at a time. He walked her through the motel corridors, pointing out signs and reading them aloud. She followed closely, memorizing each word, repeating them softly like a child learning language. When they returned, he gave her a digital pad and showed her how to draw on it. She made a picture of stars and a bright green shape. Her new jacket. She looked up at him and said, I think I like green best. Jace grinned. Then green's your favorite color? Lissa blinked. Do favorites belong to me now? He laughed and nodded. Yes, everything you feel belongs to you now. For the first time, she placed her hand on his arm, not because she was told, but because she wanted to. Her fingers were cold but steady, and her eyes were not afraid anymore. Each day, Jace gave her small lessons, how to speak in full sentences without asking permission, how to sit at the table instead of waiting in the corner, how to eat food slowly and enjoy every bite instead of rushing through service. She copied his movements at first, but soon she began making her own choices. He asked her what she would do if she could go anywhere. She said, "I want to see a place where no one is assigned to anyone." He nodded slowly and replied, "There are places like that, but getting there from here won't be easy." Lissa leaned closer. "Will you help me reach it?" Jace didn't hesitate. "Yes, I will." Later that evening, he connected his data pad to the motel's private network. He hacked into the companion service records using old codes he remembered from his freight days there in a hidden folder. He found Lissa's file. She was labeled Property Class 7, Model 17 with a control chip ID in her spine. The chip tracked her location and blocked complex emotions like anger or rebellion. Jay stared at the code and felt his stomach turn. She wasn't just trained. She was controlled like a machine. He looked over at Lissa, who was drawing another picture on the digital pad. This time it showed a hill and two small figures holding hands. He whispered to himself, "We need to remove that chip." He knew it would be risky, but leaving it meant she would never be truly free. He asked, "Sir, Lissa, do you ever feel something inside you that stops you from saying no?" She paused, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I try to say something different, but it feels like my mind freezes." Jace explained the chip to her, and she touched the back of her neck. "Can it be taken out?" she asked. "I think so," he said, "but we'll need tools and a safe place." They spent the next day planning. Jace studied blueprints of the motel, while Lissa learned how to bypass simple door locks. She moved quickly, silently, like she had done this before under different orders, but this time Sue wasn't following commands. She was building her own path. She even suggested a route through the maintenance tunnels to avoid cameras. That night, they packed only what they needed. Lissa carried a small bag with her drawings, the green jacket, and a single roll of bandages. Jace grabbed his data pad, a plasma cutter, and a shock chip disabler. Before they left the room, Lissa looked around one last time. "This was my first home," she whispered, "not because of the walls, but because of you." Jace put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Let's find you a real home now." They slipped into the hallway, moving through shadows like smoke. Each step took them deeper into the heart of the building, toward the control center. They were not just running anymore. They were preparing to break the system from inside, and for the first time, Lissa wasn't afraid of what might happen next. The motel doesn't let anyone go. Tunnel was narrow and smelled like rust and oil. Jace moved first, holding a small light, while Lissa followed close behind. Their footsteps echoed softly against the metal floor, each step heavier than the last. They were deep under the motel now, far from guests and eyes. Above them, people were eating, sleeping, and never guessing what was hidden below. They reached a thick security door with a glowing red lock. Lissa pressed her hand against the side. Panel 1 entered a string of silent commands. The panel turned green, and the door clicked open with a soft hiss. Jace looked at her in surprise. "How did You know that code. She answered it was part of my obedience training, but now I'm using it to break free inside the control room. Wires hung like vines and screens covered the walls. Every room in the motel was shown on those screens, including theirs. Lissa moved quickly to a terminal and opened her access panel. Jace stood watch at the door, gripping the small shock disabler tightly. He knew someone would notice soon, but they needed a few more minutes. Lissa's fingers moved fast, breaking through firewalls and hidden systems. She pulled up the list of all companion units currently in the building. There were over 60. Each had a number, a room, and a status. Most were listed as active, awaiting order. She paused and whispered, "They're all still here, waiting like I once did." Jace walked over and stared at the list. "Can we free them too?" he asked quietly. Lissa hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, but we need to take control of the master AI." Suddenly, an alarm blared through the tunnels. Someone had triggered a breach sensor. The screen flashed red. Unauthorized access detected. Lockdown initiated. Jace grabbed Lissa's hand. "Time to move now." They ran down another tunnel toward the old escape lifts near the cargo section. Metal doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off their retreat. Security drones dropped from the ceiling and hovered toward them with blinking red eyes. "Step away from the unit," voice ordered. Robotic and cold, Jace raised his disabler and fired. The nearest drone sparked and dropped to the ground. Lissa jumped behind him and threw a broken pipe at another drone, knocking it sideways. They kept moving, ducking under low beams and squeezing through a half-open gate. Every second felt like a countdown toward capturing a forgotten storage room. Jace collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. His arm was bleeding from a graze, but he waved it off. Lissa tore fabric from her robe and wrapped the wound quickly. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of her decision to fight. "You didn't have to help me," Jace said, "but you did anyway. I'm tired of kneeling," she whispered, "tired of waiting for someone to choose me." They looked around the room and found an old maintenance shaft leading up to the hangar. It was risky, but their only way out. As they climbed, Jace noticed faded posters on the walls, advertisements for luxury companions and emotion-free care. The world above had no idea what those words truly meant. When they reached the hangar, the air smelled of fuel and cold steel. Cargo ships rested in loading bays, and a few bots moved crates silently in the shadows. Lissa pointed to a small patrol shuttle. It looked old, but active. "That one doesn't have central AI," she said. "We can fly it manually." Jace nodded. "Let's do it fast before the system locks this place down." They rushed toward the shuttle, dodging behind crates as camera lights scanned the bay just meters from the door. A booming voice echoed overhead. "Unauthorized Unit 17. Detected. Stand down immediately." A metal turret dropped from the ceiling and began to rotate toward them. Lissa didn't wait. She ran straight ahead, drawing the fire away from Jace. He dove behind the shuttle and opened the hatch. "Lissa, get in," he shouted, but she didn't stop running. She jumped onto a moving crate, kicked off, and flew through the air toward him. The turret fired but missed by inches. Jace caught her by the arm and pulled her into the ship, slamming the hatch shut behind her. Inside, alarms flashed in. Lights blinked red. Jace dropped into the pilot's seat and began flipping switches. Lissa fell into the co-pilot seat. Breathing hard but smiling, she said, "You said I could choose, and I choose to fight." Jace smiled back. "Then let's fly before they lock us in forever." The engines roared to life and the shuttle rose into the air. Blasts fired behind them, but the ship broke through the hangar doors before the lock could seal as they soared into the sky. Lissa looked down at the motel shrinking below. Her hands clenched the seat, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I was born to serve, but now I want to live." The liberation plan, * the stars. Outside, the shuttle looked calm, but inside, everything burned with urgency. Jace guided the old ship through the upper clouds while Lissa checked the navigation panel. Her hands moved faster, now more confident, like someone who finally trusted her own choices. They weren't just running anymore, they were thinking bigger. Lissa turned to him and said, "We have to go back, not for me, but for all of them." Jace glanced at her and nodded without a word. She didn't need to explain the memory of all those files. All those silent names still burned in his mind. He asked, "Do you know where they're kept?" Lissa tapped the screen, opening a hidden map she had pulled from the control room. "There's a lower floor under the main structure called the vault," she said. "That's where the inactive units sleep." Jace landed the shuttle at a nearby junkyard outside city limits. Hiding it behind metal scrap towers, he picked up his old gear from the Baka plasma cutter, a jammer device, and a flashlight. Lissa grabbed her green jacket and tied it tightly around her. Jace looked at her and said, "You sure you're ready for this?" She didn't hesitate. "I was trained to obey." Under cover of night, they walked back toward the motel through the sewer tunnels. This time, Lissa led the way with firm steps, knowing which pipes to avoid and where the cameras blinked. She used her codes to trick doors open and led Jace to a hidden elevator shaft. "This was never on the guest map," she said. "It's where broken or unassigned units are stored." They climbed down the shaft with ropes made from old curtain sheets and wiring. The vault was colder than the rest of the motel. Rows of sleep pods lined the walls, each holding a girl like Lissa frozen in artificial sleep. Waiting for command, they wore the same white robes and each had a nameplate with numbers instead of real names. Lissa moved from pod to pod, whispering softly to each one. She stopped at a girl with green markings on her cheeks and said, "This one helped me learn music in training. We have to save her." Jace opened the control panel and plugged in his disabler. "I can break the lock," he said, "but once we start, the system will know we're here." Lissa nodded and touched the pod, her voice shaking. "Then we better not waste time." The first pod hissed open, and the girl inside blinked slowly, her eyes wide with fear. Lissa knelt beside her and said, "You're safe now. We're not property anymore." One by one, they began waking more. Some were confused, others cried. A few simply stared in silence. Lissa stood tall in front of them all and spoke clearly. "You were trained to serve, but now you can choose who you are," she said. Jace watched her speak, realizing she had become something powerful, something more than just free. Security alerts triggered above in red. Lights started blinking in the vault. Jace shouted, "We've got maybe 5 minutes before lockdown." He opened a floor panel, revealing an old cargo tunnel that led directly to the hangars. The girls moved quickly, following Lissa. Through the dark space like a silent wave, Jace stayed behind, planting shock bombs at key points to stall any pursuing guards in the hangar. The stolen shuttle's engines hummed. Waiting to launch, Jace climbed aboard and powered up the systems while Lissa helped the others find seats. Some girls had never been outside the building before. They stared out the windows in silent wonder. Suddenly, heavy doors slammed down, blocking their exit. The motel's central AI activated, its voice booming through hidden speakers. "Return the assets immediately or face destruction." Jace looked at Lissa. "We're locked in the ship, can't break through those blast doors." She turned to the group and said, "Who here knows their control codes?" A few girls raised their hands slowly. Together, they linked into the system using mental chips and overloaded the AI's primary node. Sparks flew across panels, and lights flickered. The system screamed as its control began to collapse. The blast doors groaned and lifted slowly as the AI's voice broke into static. Jace pulled the lever, and the ship surged forward, bursting through the hangar and into the sky. The girls inside cried out in joy, holding hands, gripping walls, or simply staring at freedom for the first time. Lissa sat beside Jace, her hands shaking but her eyes full of fire. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You gave them a future they never knew they could have." The stars opened before them like a wide road without limits. Behind them, the motel shrank into the distance, its lights fading, its chains broken ahead. Freedom waited, and the beginning of something greater. Jace reached over and took Lissa's hand as the ship flew higher. Together, they were no longer running. They were leading the way. Fighting for the right to choose. The stars outside glowed brighter than ever. But the celebration inside the ship was short-lived. An alert flashed on the shuttle screen, showing 3 incoming signals moving fast. Jace leaned forward and checked the data. 3 drones, heavily armed, dispatched from the motel's satellite outpost. "They're not letting this go," he said through gritted teeth. Lissa stood behind him, her face calm but determined. "Then neither will we." The girls behind them sat quietly, watching with wide eyes. They had tasted freedom only minutes ago. Now it was being chased by machines. Jace adjusted the shuttle's flight path, aiming toward an asteroid belt nearby. "If we lose them in the rocks, they might break off," he explained. Lissa nodded. "We can use the gravity slingshot and hide behind the dust trails." The drones drew closer, their weapon systems locking onto the shuttle. Jace pulled hard on the controls, the ship jerking left into the edge of the belt. Small rocks scratched the sides of the hull, but the larger ones provided cover. The first drone fired, missing by inches, sending a blast past the engines. One of the girls screamed, but Alyssa turned and said gently, "We are not going to die. We are going to be free." Jace opened a weapons panel. This shuttle wasn't built for war, but it had flare launchers and a weak EMP. He launched a flare and twisted the ship through a tight cluster of rocks. The Closest drone clipped a stone and spun. Its path broken. Alyssa pointed, their aim the EMP when. They line up in the clearing. Jace set the charge his hand, sweating on the control stick. The drones moved into position. One behind the other. Jace waited, counted in his head, then hit the button. A pulse of blue light shot backward, cracking like lightning in space. The second drone froze. Systems fried and fell behind, drifting. In silence, the last drone dodged and fired a plasma bolt that rocked the shuttle hard. Panels sparked inside, and one of the girls fell from her seat with a cry. Jace turned around. Is she hurt? Alyssa checked quickly and shook her head. Just shaken. He gritted his teeth and said, "One more left, we finish this." He flipped the ship in a hard turn and headed straight toward the last drone. The drone charged its weapons. The shuttle didn't slow down. Jace kept his eyes on the target, the flare cannon ready in his hand. At the last second he fired the flare, blinded the drone sensors, and the shuttle slipped beneath it. Alyssa pulled open the emergency hatch and threw out a magnetic bomb they had stolen from the motel storage. The bomb clamped onto the drone and exploded silently in space. The shockwave rolled the shuttle, and alarms blared again. Jace managed to stabilize the ship. Smoke rising from the left wing. They were alive, but barely. The girls inside hugged each other, wide-eyed, quiet and still. Alyssa sat beside Jace, her hands gripping her knees, but her voice strong. "We fought back," she said, "not because we had weapons, but because we had a reason." Jace looked at her, tired but proud. "You gave them hope. Alyssa's something real." She looked down at her hands, then back at the others. "They deserve more than just running. They deserve a home." He nodded slowly. "I know a colony that doesn't ask where you come from, only where you want to go." Alyssa smiled for the first time since they launched. "Then let's go." They're not to hide, but to live. They spent hours patching the ship and comforting the rescued girls. Some began to speak, others asked questions, and a few simply held Alyssa's hand as if she were the only safe thing left in the universe. Jace worked the controls quietly, navigating through the last debris of the asteroid belt. Beyond it lay a green planet, small, unmarked, and peaceful. That was where they were going, now not as fugitives, but as people with purpose. As the shuttle glided down into the atmosphere, wind brushing over the wings, Alyssa stood near the window. She looked out at the rising hills and trees below and whispered, "I was made to serve, but I choose to belong." Jace heard her and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They had fought for freedom with nothing but courage and belief. And now the future was no longer given. It was chosen. Love isn't ordered. Asterisk. The shuttle touched down on the green planet like a falling feather. No alarms, no guards, no walls, just open fields and quiet skies. The wind blew softly through tall grass, and the trees shimmered under a golden sun. Jace powered down the engines and looked at Alyssa, who stood near the hatch staring at the horizon. She whispered, "It doesn't feel real, but it is." The rescued girls stepped out slowly, their bare feet sinking into soft earth. Some bent down to touch the grass with shaking hands, others cried without sound. No one gave them orders. No one forced them to move. They just stood there breathing freedom. Alyssa turned around and helped the last Girl down the ramp. Steadying her with care, Jace watched. From a distance, realizing something he hadn't seen. Before, she was no longer just free. She was leading. A small community lived. Nearby farmers, engineers, and travelers who had built homes without rules or flags. They welcomed the newcomers with food, blankets, and open arms. No one asked who they had served or where they had come from. Here, names were given, not numbers. Here, no one belonged to anyone, but everyone belonged somewhere. Days passed, then weeks, and peace became routine. The girls began to laugh. More explore the forests, build shelters, and learn new things. Jace helped repair solar panels and taught some how to cook without machines. Lissa painted with bright colors. Her favorite still green, often with stars in the corners of her canvas. She spent mornings near the river, her feet in the water, sketching with calm hands and a quiet smile. One morning, Jace found her sitting alone near a tree, holding a half-finished drawing. He sat beside her and asked, "Why'd you stop?" She looked at him and said, "I was drawing what I want, but I got scared it was too much." He smiled gently. "Nothing is too much if it's yours to want." She leaned into him, her voice soft. "Then I want to stay, not as someone who was freed, but as someone who chose to be here." That night, there was no ceremony, no crowd, just two people walking beneath stars. Lissa wore a handmade dress, simple but beautiful, with streaks of color she had painted herself. Jace brought her a single flower from the field, unsure if it was enough. She laughed when she saw it and said, "It's more than enough," because it wasn't ordered. He took her hand, and they stood together in silence as the wind passed around them like music. Their house wasn't large yet. It had 2 rooms, a wide window, and tools hanging near the door. Inside, her drawings lined the walls, and his books rested near a small lamp. They shared chores, meals, and sometimes quiet dreams when words weren't needed. There were no rules between them, just choice every day to be there for each other. One evening, she turned to him and said, "You never once told me what to do, and that's why I love you." He didn't reply right away. He just held her hand and kissed her forehead. Some love is loud, full of noise and fire, but theirs was something different. It had grown like the roots of a tree, slow and strong deep beneath the surface. It came from kindness, and it survived every storm without breaking, and it began the moment she was no longer given, but finally allowed to choose. Out in the hills, the other girls built new lives too. Some became teachers, others builders, a few even pilots. None of them wore collars or carried labels again. Their voices, once hidden, now filled the valley with stories and songs. They were not survivors anymore. They were people, and they were finally home. Jay stood by the window one morning as Lissa brushed her hair beside the mirror. She caught him watching and said with a smile, "You still stare at me like I'm a miracle." He laughed and replied, "That's because you are, but not because of what they made you." She turned, walked over and kissed him softly. "No," she whispered, "because of what you helped me become."